FMCSA Chief Martinez gets an earful at the Mid-America Trucking Show. Driver retention drives the debate at the Truckload Carriers Association annual meeting. Vapor and Hanger announce a merger to create a drone technology infrastructure across the U.S., starting in Chicago. Amazon, Tesla, and other tech companies have a very bad week. I'm JP.
And I'm Chad.
And we'll be discussing these topics and more on this week's episode of What the Truck.
What kind of beer are you drinking, JP?
Well, you know I'm rolling with Bell's Two-Hearted out of Comstock, Michigan. It's got notes of pine and grapefruit, but most importantly, it takes me back to grad school in good old Ann Arbor.
You must like going there a lot because you drink it every time.
I have fond memories. Chad, what about you?
Well, I'm drinking Lagunitas Little Something Something Ale, which once upon a time would have been cool because they were one of the biggest independent breweries in the United States.
But then once you started drinking it,
they got taken over by Heineken. They gave in, they sold out, I'm sorry to say. But this particular one is the something something. See, they have a little something, and that's only like 6.0 ABV. This one is a little something something, and it is 7.5 ABV.
Well, I hope you can make it through this podcast because you're on your second.
And now it's time for story time. Last time at the beginning of our segment, we played Did You Know? We'll always try to have a fun little game at the beginning. And today's is story time. JP, take it away.
So I have two stories for us this week from kind of the remote fringes of the trucking world. The first one comes actually from a Reddit thread on Our Truckers that one of our marketing people set up. He was asking about what are the worst load unload experiences you've had at a shipper. And the longest time that we saw for an unload, 1.5 weeks. 1.5 weeks.
1.5 weeks
to unload a truck. And let me explain. This was a truck in remote Alaska, about 500 kilometers from the nearest town, full with a 90,000 pound load of bags of concrete and other like random like parts.
That's a lot of concrete.
Yeah. Well, it gets worse. So this truck arrives at the pickup point, and there's a helicopter there. And the helicopter is going to take the concrete to this mining exploration camp that's even further north, even further out of the way, obviously no road access. And so how do they get the concrete off the truck into the helicopter? By hand.
They need autonomous help for that.
It wouldn't have really mattered because they could only load about 4,000 pounds at a time. The round trip was like 5 hours.
Wow. In
the helicopter. And so the trucker kind of ended his comment by saying, yeah, we were there for a while.
That's a good story.
The other story I heard in the office this afternoon was really cool too. It was from Dean Croak, FreightWaves Chief Analytics Officer, who's actually Australian and spent a lot of time doing long-haul over-the-road trucking in Australia, right, going across the entire outback, which a lot of it's dirt roads. It's crazy. The stories he was telling our data guys were blowing their minds. But one of the funny things that he was talking about was basically driving what they call road trains, which are these 3 big linked trailers all connected to the same tractor.
Wow.
190,000 pound weight limits.
Which you can't do in the U.S.
You can't do in the U.S. It's totally different. I mean, he was talking about having like these sort of hyper-aggressive water buffalo on the upper deck of a livestock carrier. They're fighting, and the trailer is like swaying from side to side. But anyway, I thought what was really cool is that this is very Straya Australian kind of stereotypical story, but
Nice try with the accent there.
appreciate it. It takes 4 days to drive from Sydney to Darwin in the the upper north region, the northern coast of Australia. 4 days across the outback. And what you do as an Australian truck driver is you load your truck up with 2 weeks worth of beer and food in case you break down on the way. It could take that long for someone to come find you. And every truck also is outfitted with its own grill.
Wow,
so you can have
I like the way they roll.
So you get the roast shrimp on the barbie every night. And what they would do is every night they would pull the fun. He said the fun part about that job was at night on the outback you would pull over someplace in the middle of nowhere with all the other truck drivers. Start grilling steaks and shrimp and having a nice food. Have a big bonfire. Everybody starts pounding beers, gets drunk, and then what do? You're in Australia. You find a kangaroo to fight.
Yes.
Yes, that is what
I was going to say.
That is what Dean Crook said. He said they would get drunk and fight kangaroos in the middle of the night, and then the next day continue driving their trucks. That is story time for this week. Why don't we go ahead and dive into our first story? Our editor, John Kingston, was at the Mid-America Trucking Show this week, and he was actually able to buttonhole the FMCSA chief, the new FMCSA chief, Ray Martinez, after his little presentation, and was able to kind of get an exclusive interview that actually did pretty well in terms of traffic on the site. Chad, can you just kind of introduce the story?
Yeah, well, as I understand it, Ray Martinez has been on what he called an aggressive listening tour, where he is being aggressively talked to by truckers upset with the forthcoming ELD mandate, the hard line of the April 1st, you better comply date. And he's, his aggressive listening has led him to saying, you know what, it's happening. The ELDs, there's not going to be a lot of exemptions here, except for livestock and some that are absolutely necessary. But one of the major complaints that we've actually been hearing for months anyway is the HOS, hours of service. They're inflexible. They don't really seem to be about safety. And so he's, been saying maybe we can do something about it.
Right. And so we're talking about, the 14 hours on duty, 11 hours driving, the fact that you can't, stop and sleep without, and also stop your clock. And so, right. And so, even though the government said that the ELD mandate was all about promoting driver safety, it's actually in many cases forcing drivers to drive when they're tired.
Right. And why does it do that?
Yeah. So here's an example. Say you have 3 hours of service left for the day, and you're about 2 hours away from your destination. But the problem is you're exhausted, you're sleepy, you're very tired. Under the current rules, you can't take a 2-hour nap and then drive to your destination, because that would take 4 hours and you only have 3 hours of service left. So the 2-hour nap would come off of your hours of service. It kind of defeats the purpose in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
There are also studies that show that after drivers have been unreasonably detained or detained for a long amount of time at a shipper, getting a load, they tend to drive faster and speed as they start their day.
Yeah, wouldn't you? I mean, I would.
Yeah, because they're stressed out. They're accountable to this system of rules, even though they're not really completely in control of their schedule. So the shippers aren't accountable to the HOS, but they're actually in control of the productivity of these trucks. And so it's really frustrating. It's stressful. It causes some poor driving decisions. It causes
you might have to speed. If you can't find parking. Of course, detention is a big issue with.
And so what's interesting though is that the FMCA is already. We know that they're already looking into what they call a split sleeper schedule. They have a pilot program running with, I think, it's something like 55 drivers, 70 drivers, something like that, where they are letting the drivers break up their sleep like in 4-hour chunks instead of just, all at once. And what they're hooking them up to, electrodes and the whole deal.
Wow.
Just to see, like, physiologically, can a driver get the rest he needs or he or she needs? Do the brain waves match, like, in terms of like the deep sleep REM cycles?
I think you need at least 4 at a time.
Yeah, and we actually, FreightWaves Chief Analytics Officer Dean Croak is actually really good on sleep and has done a number of telematics-based.
Yeah, we've got a lot
studies.
of data on that on the site.
So look to FreightWaves for further coverage of driver sleep and how and the physiology of it and how carriers can match biological rhythms to shipping schedules and driving schedules, so they can maintain productivity and safety at the same time.
Yeah. Well, and so the hours of service. So what did, on his aggressive listening tour, what did Martinez conclude? Well, one of the things he pointed out is that hours of service is a regulatory requirement and doesn't necessarily, therefore, need congressional intervention to be changed. However, Congress could change the hours of service rule as well. But the bad news, as soon as we get some good news on that.
If he's trying to pass the buck to Congress, he's basically saying that this is the most dysfunctional arm of the government.
He even said, if Congress gets involved, and I don't know if that ever happens, but if it does, don't be surprised if it doesn't work out the way you want. He said, the other path to change is we might be able to get some flexibility, but if we go the regulation route, that will probably take 2 years. So if I'm a driver and I don't like these hours of service rules, and I'm basically being told that the only way to change this new rule that's just now coming into be enforced compliance is to go through Congress or wait 2 or 3 years, it just doesn't seem like it takes a rocket scientist to be able to give flexibility to this ELD mandate.
Yeah, unfortunately, the only people that really have pull with the FMCSA are going to be, special interest groups that have, expensive lobbyists, the very largest carriers, specific industries like agriculture, things like you have to. To get any kind of movement on these regulations, you have to have people in Washington who know their counterparts in the FMCSA, who are taking them out to dinner, who are in their ear, working with them very closely. It's not just, we write a petition and therefore we get the hours of service changed. Unfortunately, this is the country we live in.
Right. So anyway, stay tuned and we will bring you any updates on it. Hopefully it will be a faster moving story than is currently meeting the eye. Another one of our editorial staff was at the TCA conference, the Truckload Carriers Association. And what do you think that the story of the whole thing, the main story was, if you had to even guess?
I would say the driver shortage and driver retention.
Yeah, well, you already know, so I guess you're not having to guess.
Yeah, so what,
it continues to dominate the topics.
Right, so there's the driver shortage, meaning that carriers are having a hard time filling empty trucks, but there's also a driver retention issue. Right, so there's too much churn. There's too much turnover. There's huge expense associated with replacing a driver, training a new one, onboarding them. Up to I've heard for the large carriers, this is like $8,000 a driver. And so if you have a 100% turnover rate, you're paying that every single year for every truck you have.
They spend a lot of money in bonuses and training and training drivers only to have them fulfill the very bare minimum of requirements in order to get their bonus, and then they're Audi, right? Not driving an Audi, but getting out of town. Because why? Because driving's tough, right?
Driving's tough, and for too long, the big carriers have really just treated drivers like commodities. It's a numbers game to them. They're hiring people that aren't necessarily suited to the job. And anyway, so tell me about what was the conversation around driver retention like at TCA this year?
Well, I mean, they were pointing out like that basically everybody is responsible for trying to change the culture. That was a term that was apparently used a lot. How do you build a culture when there isn't one? Compensation naturally was at the top of the list of truckers of what they wanted, and I think that rates are rising, and they probably are going to be paid more. It's a supply and demand issue. This is something we've frequently covered on FreightWaves. But there were also non-financial reasons cited as well. Lack of communication, which hopefully will be getting better in this digital world that we're living in. Often too, they feel like they have a poor relationship with managers. That was named. If I'm remembering, I think a lack of home time, which I don't know how you're going to change that.
Well, no, I mean,
yeah, you can.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I spoke to the president of logistics for a small 225 trucking fleet earlier this week. Alabama Motor Express. It's run by the White family. So I spoke to Collins White. He's the second generation executive for that company. And he kind of had a multi-pronged approach to driver retention. And he was saying, first of all, we're paying them more.
Yeah.
He said he doesn't believe in sign-on bonuses because like you said, he thinks that kind of contributes to, you hire sort of disloyal people in a way. But he raises the per mile rate by 7 cents in the past 3 years. He is the whole fleet themselves are transitioning from over the road to a regional fleet, to regional lanes, so that their drivers can get home more.
Yeah.
And they've implemented the JOBehaviors Assessment, which I read about this week, to basically try to identify out of their applicants who are the people that have the core values, behaviors, and attributes of top performing drivers. Who are the people most likely, based on the psychological profile, to do well at truck driving? They try to only hire those people. Now it's slowed down.
And that does seem like that would help with driver retention.
It's slowed down their hiring a little bit.
Yeah.
But out of the people that they've hired using that program, they haven't lost any of them.
That was one of the topics of conversation. Sorry to interrupt. It was that driver incentive programs aiming toward more retention have costs, and sometimes there are actually disincentives as well, which we don't need to get into. But just also the idea of general. There is no one size fits all, and there is the
you need a holistic approach. You need to do everything possible. You need to look
maybe not one size fits all, but maybe a holistic approach. Yeah.
I mean, you have to look at your equipment. How comfortable is the sleeper cab? Like what amenities are you providing? What.
Yeah, and just generally, I think just people are drivers are humans. Treat them with some courtesy and respect, and that's another thing that they were asking about, and I think some of those we'll touch on it, but detention. When you arrive at your place and you're ready to unload and you have to wait a long time, that's aggravating for everybody involved. And I think detention needs shippers and receivers.
Yeah, I think carriers need to make sure that their drivers are getting paid if they're delayed.
Right.
I don't know whether the answer is something like blockchain, some other kind of sort of digital contract that automates that, but it's frustrating. It's a huge industry inefficiency and pain point to have to fight for your detention pay after the fact when you've already left, and the people that you hate, the shipper that's screwing you over is holding your money, and then you're trying to get it from them as you're driving away. I mean, that doesn't work.
Yeah. So it seems like there's some movement in that direction. what is another story that we're covering today?
So one of the really interesting stories, actually, that you wrote today was the merger of these two tech companies, sort of
That's right.
cloud-based computing, data analytics companies, Vapor and Hanger, that are trying to create a drone technology infrastructure. Basically, mostly in Chicago, and they're building these
all over the nation. They're
all over
beginning it. They're beginning their first one is a rollout in this quarter in Chicago. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're kind of like it seemed to me like they were almost the way you would build out like cell tower technology or something like that.
Yeah.
It's almost like they're building out these micro stations kind of around the loop. And if you're familiar with the layout of Chicago.
That's right. They are. They're like micro data centers.
Yeah, that communicate with these drones. Get into that a little bit.
So it's Vapor and Hanger, yeah, and they took the opportunity of this week as they were announcing the merger. They took the opportunity of all the stuff that's happened with autonomous self-driving cars and the bad headlines that they've got this week, and they basically said, what's going to come first is some infrastructure before these individual like self-driving cars are going to hit the road. And this is they said we don't need to build roads, we don't need to install traffic lights, we don't need traffic signs. We need infrastructure for software, data, and communications. And the drone infrastructure they're building will program drone flights.
Right.
And provide real-time data feeds for traffic management, decisions, emergency responses, all kinds of capabilities.
Right. So one of the limitations of drones and using drones is basically if you've ever flown one before, it's line of sight essentially. So you've got the controls in your hand. You're looking at the drone. If you go over the ridge or dip behind a building, you lose the connection, drone crashes. So there has to be a way for companies who want to, for example, with commercial package delivery by drones, like you have to have a network of towers that can communicate, solve problems, map the environment, placed throughout a city's landscape, so that drone can always maintain a line of sight.
Yeah, and this is an interesting part about the story, I thought, is that their argument is that drone technology will advance more quickly than autonomous, according to their CIO, Matt Trefiro. And this is why. There are fewer life safety issues. It's also a lot less complicated to navigate in coordinated airspace than to drive on a road that has all kinds of obstacles, road signs, rules, and so on, including, as we've recently reported, on unpredictable humans.
Right. It's less complicated now. I wonder what it's going to look like if drones become a huge thing and the air is buzzing with drones. But we're not there yet.
Apparently, that is part of the very way that they would be programmed, which is kind of amazing to think about. They wouldn't even, it's like they're programmed to fly in these very coordinated, specific ways. It's kind of fascinating. And one of the arguments against, self-driving cars, which I think is a very legitimate point, is that the cost and size and complexity and power consumption that each and every little self-driving car, which is basically its own little supercomputer, would have, keeps it from being very scalable. It's one thing to have all these test cars that we have, but to truly produce these things, as we're seeing, I have to admit, Tesla's having issues with.
Same in Uber.
And Uber, yeah, that's a different maybe reason why they're having trouble. I don't know. So it's a fascinating story.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy that basically you can be a 14-year-old human and drive a car, and I don't know. When I was in India, I went from Manali to Leh on this crazy mountain road in this Jeep driven by like a 15-year-old Nepalese kid. Yeah. And he did amazing. There was no guardrails. We were looking over the edge of mountains. It was insane. It was like, I can't believe he's doing it. And now we're spending, in the U.S., hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to get the most advanced technology to replicate something that's actually quite easy for humans to do.
Yeah.
It's kind of we're in a
is.
topsy-turvy kind of world in some ways.
Yeah, they'll look back at 100 years of what we've been through, and it'll just be like, it'll like the Model T, looks to us now.
Right.
Well, that is a fascinating story, something to keep up with. Also today, Trump enters the headlines again with what now?
Yeah, so Trump really wants to regulate Amazon. We've known that he's had it in for Jeff Bezos. I think part of this, might also come from the fact that Bezos owns the Washington Post,
right?
Which, since his ownership has taken a much more, liberal slant. It's been critical of Trump. It adopted the motto, "Democracy dies in darkness." So
I think he was even after them before that.
Yeah, he was, but
So what is Trump specifically? How is it? What's his strategy? Is there a policy in place now? So
there's not a policy in place now, but basically from what I can gather from his tweets, there are two main complaints about Amazon. The first one is that they are ripping off the U.S. Postal Service by paying less than market rates for their rural and suburban deliveries. So essentially, the idea is that Amazon is building out its last mile delivery systems that are really going to and getting network density in urban areas that it can kind of take over and manage from fulfillment center all the way to your doorstep. But for suburban and rural, routes that are very much less dense, are not as lucrative, Amazon is basically leaning on the USPS really hard, and it's supposedly the Postal Service is like losing like $2 for every Amazon package they deliver.
I don't know all the ins and outs of how the deal was constructed. Some argue that basically Amazon it floats the USPS. Without Amazon, that they wouldn't have enough business to even be operating at all. Of course, they actually don't right now. Others argue that the deal that they made could have been a lot better for USPS. A troubling statistic for USPS is that since 2007, they have accrued more than $63 billion, that's billion with a B, as people always like to say, in cumulative net losses. So we're talking about, that averages out to, around $6 billion a year that they are losing.
So
that's one part of the.
So essentially, you're just saying that it costs $6 billion a year to have a postal system,
right? And
which is nothing compared to say building an aircraft carrier, which is like $13 billion.
That's a good point. So you're saying we should keep the mail?
I'm saying that there's been a lot of shenanigans with the way that the U.S. Postal Service finances are calculated, that they're actually, they mostly pay for themselves, and if it costs a little bit, I mean, it's
just the way that the statistics are being used. Like Mark Twain said, there's statistics, and then there's damn statistics.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm skeptical of anyone saying that the U.S. Postal Service is in financial trouble.
Well, what about this? This is the other thing this is another approach that not only Trump could strategically go after Amazon, but also actually literally the Supreme Court is listening to arguments this year on this topic, and that is whether or not states can collect sales tax from an online vendor. So this obviously
they already do. So
no, they have to have a physical presence in that state. If they don't have the physical presence, you can't collect the sales tax.
Interesting.
And that is a 1992 Supreme Court finding when they used the terminology of mail order catalog companies.
Right.
So people are arguing it's a different day and age. And
the thing is that most of these e-commerce merchants, the big ones, have physical presences in. I mean, like for example, if the intention is to go after Amazon, Amazon has a physical presence in nearly every U.S. I mean, I don't know about like Rhode Island, but like for example, where we are in Tennessee, there are multiple fulfillment centers across the state. So I mean, it's not they're already paying sales there.
We don't know what the implications
I don't quite
are.
understand the angle. What if Trump decided to impose some kind of universal digital sales tax? Because
Okay, well, here's a bottom line question. Like, we don't know how it affects the supply chain yet. We wouldn't know the implications of all that. But like, I mean, this is an interesting question. Like, don't you think? Doesn't it seem like Amazon is kind of dominating, kind of monopolizing? Like, just it's taking it over everything.
I just think it's kind of ironic.
Do you just like it as a consumer?
I do like it as a consumer. They have a great product. I'm like an old school Amazon customer, so I mostly buy books on Amazon, and I love the fact that.
And they're destroying the publishing industry. Okay, we don't need to digress on that,
But I think it's ironic that like 20 years ago, Congress didn't do anything when Walmart was destroying all the mom and pop stores.
Yeah.
By importing Chinese plastic and selling it for much cheaper than American-produced goods in these small general stores. Now, all of a sudden, we have to defend Walmart from Amazon. It's like, no. Like I don't actually care if Amazon defeats Walmart.
This is overall, I feel like Trump has a vested interest here. He owns real estate, and a lot of his own companies and businesses would stand to gain to hurt Amazon. I believe in a free market and an open market, and while I do think that there are some there are some aspects to Amazon that are dangerous. I think that other people need to figure out like how to compete with them.
Yeah, ultimately, I don't think the government should be in the business of picking winners and losers.
Indeed. So those are the top stories of the week. Now we're going to play Big Deal or Little Deal, in which Chad and JP run down the rest of the stories of the week in 2 minutes or under. Do we get a reward if we do it in a minute and a half? No reward, says our producer, Barry. Barry, you're looking good over there.
Thanks, Barry. Thanks for nothing.
You got the wheat jeans on, looking very granola, very chatanola.
So we love talking shit to Barry because he can't actually talk back. He's a producer. Okay.
We love you, Barry.
Let's get this started. Turndowns outbound from Philadelphia are skyrocketing. Big deal or little deal?
Big deal. Although you could say this was weather related, it's a backhaul market, sure, but and the area has been hit by a record 4 nor'easters in a single season. I'm seeing the rising rates as sticking. I don't see this as going away anytime soon, and rates might rise nationally as well.
Regional manufacturing readings are retreating from highs as recent tariffs begin to bite. Big deal or little deal?
Little deal, surprisingly enough. I mean, the tariff commentary within this report is informative, but it even might be overstated. We really don't know what's happening. The regional surveys could be threatening to the industry, but there's a lot of uncertainty, and we just don't know how the policy is going forward.
Convoy announces automatic detention pay as it expands nationwide. Big deal or little deal?
I'm going to say big deal, even though it's just, basically an ELD with the fancy button that says, drivers will get paid for detention time. Hopefully this can help drivers, the very thing we've been talking about, which is to get paid better and have better retention by paying them for their detention. The South heats up, but Atlanta is on fire. Big deal or little deal?
Big deal. We've been seeing turndown activity spike in a number of cities, and Atlanta is leading the way with about 25% turndowns. This signifies a strong March uptick for the region and a strong 2018 for freight.
Wheat exports railroad traffic vulnerable to tariffs. Big deal or little deal?
Unfortunately, little deal. American wheat production is in secular decline because of bottom of the barrel international prices. We're not helping ourselves by pulling out of TPP. and railroad grain volumes continue to fall.
But I do like Barry's Wheat Jeans. The Job Behaviors Assessment may have solved driver retention. Big deal or little deal?
Huge deal. Predictive hiring is the #future of freight.
And that'll do it for the big stories this week. As always, we go into more detail about each of the topics we've talked about today on our website, FreightWaves.com. We will continue to publish this podcast weekly, so be sure to subscribe to What the Truck on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. Also, make sure to leave us a review to let us know what you think of our new podcast.
And if you're into learning about technology that's shaping up the industry, you definitely want to be at Transparency 18 in Atlanta this May. Visit transparency18.com to learn more about the event.
That'll do it for today. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next week on What the Truck.